That
Okay. Well,
that's actually my first time being here.
that's okay. Well, we're glad to have you, Kate.
Thank you.
Yep, we're going to get started on this training. We're going to continue discussing atheism. So we'll do a quick recap of last lesson. And also for those of you watching in the course, uh, Jonathan Juke got caught up and is unable to make this call. He's actually preparing for a trip to Hawaii right now. So he will be coming out to visit us, which is very exciting, but he's also very busy. So I will be filling in on the training on atheism. So we will recap the last session. And Kate, if you'd like to watch, this is also in the subscription plan that you have access to. And you can catch up on that first video. But basically, atheism, the letter A in atheism means no, and theism means God. So it is essentially the belief that there is no God. We did discuss what we might call agnostic atheism last week, which is maybe what we would call something a little bit less of an honest position on atheism, intellectually honest. But either way, so atheists believe there is no God, and they believe that we're here most of the time. And in what I mean by that is we're here in the world, and we got here somehow. And so to explain how this happens, Christians, we would say, well, there's a God, and he created the world, and he created the world to work with certain systems. And so we're here because God made us, and here we are. Well, the atheist cannot appeal to God for explaining how anything came to be. So they have to take what we would call naturalistic approach. Generally, it's naturalistic. A naturalistic approach to explaining how we got here. And what naturalism is sort of a subcategory of atheism. And naturalism is basically, here is how every single thing came about naturally. And so for this, we have, for example, the Big Bang. They'll say, well, the universe didn't come from God, it came from the Big Bang. And, the galaxies expanded and gravity pulled things together. And we can explain how galaxies form with gravity and how solar systems form with gravity. And so we can have this sort of developmental process of our solar system. And then the Earth, was all these chunks of rock slowly accumulating over time. And was this big, basically ball of lava for a long time. But as it cooled, because all the rocks are cleared out of the solar system, then it cooled. And then we have the ability for life to begin to develop. Maybe the atmosphere starts to kind of rise. And so we have an atmosphere, and then we can have life that starts to develop. And then we have evolution. And now here we are, we're the top of this sort of evolutionary tree of life. And that is the essential argument of naturalism, is we came to exist purely through natural phenomenon. There is nothing miraculous. And then in addition to that, atheists typically take a physicalistic or a physicalist approach as well, which would say there is nothing supernatural because there's nothing super. There's nothing outside the natural world. There is no God. There is no deity. There's no supernatural. There's no spiritual. It is just material. And so everything that came about happened naturally, but it also only happens physically. And then that then gives insight into their beliefs on what happens when you die. What happens when you die is you just simply cease to exist. There is no afterlife. Excuse me, I've got an itch on my nose. There is no afterlife. There is no consciousness after death. Your consciousness, there is no your body and you. There is no mind and brain. It's just your brain. Your brain, your consciousness just is a weird fluke thing that happens from your brain firing off stuff, and all of the firing of all of those neurons happening at the same time results in consciousness by some weird process that we have no idea how it works. That's really the explanation. It's just super complicated and we can't understand it. But when you die, your consciousness ceases to exist, and you no longer exist. And so basically, when you die, your body is just material, and it goes back into the earth, and that's it. So that is atheism in a nutshell. And in this call, I want to begin breaking down a couple of these positions. And I want to start with what is called, we'll just start from the beginning. And sounds good. And so at the beginning is what we would call creation. God said, let there be light, and there was light. And, we had evening and morning on the first day. Great. Well, atheists do not believe God created. And so at the beginning, they have to say where things came from if they didn't come from a creation event. And now when we look at science, in the mid 1950s, it was believed that the universe was eternal. And this was actually a pretty good position, as far as I understand, for atheists, because they said, we don't need a God. The universe existed forever. And that is a logically valid position. If the universe is eternal and the science supports that, then it is the thing that has existed eternally. And that's maybe in reference to what Aristotle would say is the unmoved mover, the uncaused causer, and I believe that's Aristotle. But you have to have a first thing. You can't just have stuff going back forever and ever and ever. That's called an infinite regress. And we're going to start to see that play out, but we'll break that down more as we continue. So as we began to look at the expansion rate of the universe with Edwin Hubble, and as in I think the early 1900s, and as we began to see the cosmic microwave background radiation with satellites like the Hubble Space Telescope and other satellites that pick up like other types of radiation, microwaves specifically. And we can see the afterglow of the Big Bang scientifically, verifiably through evidence. And it's, look, okay, the universe is expanding. We're seeing this with the telescopes. Things are moving further apart. Well, if you rewind that, that means things are coming backwards, and they actually start at an origination point. That's also what you see in the microwave radiation and any number of other things. And so the evidence starts to come out, and it starts to say, oh, okay, so there was actually this event where there was nothing and everything came out of it and banged and started expanding. And that is now what we call the Big Bang. And the question that atheists first have to answer is, what caused the Big Bang? And the problem is, when you get back to the Big Bang, you no longer can use science. And so science in regard to physics, that's what's relevant in the Big Bang. So this is firstly called the study of cosmology, or the study of the beginning of the universe. And in cosmology, in physics, which is what we use to study cosmology, you only have basically three things. You have time, you have space, and you have matter. And these are really the only three things that physics studies, is time, space, and matter. Space being the distance that we take up, time being the stuff that we go forward through, or at least it seems like we move forward through this thing called time, and matter, which is what we're all made up of. Well, all of those things came from the Big Bang. Everything we can measure started at this initial point when there was nothing, and then there it was. So we can study time, we can study space, we can study matter, but all those things came from the Big Bang, the initial point, and before that, there was no time, is what the science seems to indicate. There was no space, there was no matter, and so there is nothing that we can measure prior to the Big Bang. We can look back, my understanding is a few 100,000 years after the Big Bang, and that's it. And the question for atheists is, what started the Big Bang? Why was there nothing for presumably just an infinite amount of time? Who knows? And then all of a sudden, bang, the universe blows up, and here we are. Why did that happen? And the really crazy thing is, you cannot go to any scientific explanation, because science started at the Big Bang. Out of the Big Bang came all the things that science can measure. And so what we are left with is a position of faith. And this is something that many atheists, who are maybe not the most well-read atheists, they don't really recognize, that the Big Bang argument is a faith claim. So yes, the science points to a Big Bang, but where did it come from? And what they'll say is some type of theory that is a model of how the Big Bang came to be. And so for example, and I'm curious, Kate, have you ever heard of the multiverse theory? This is pretty popular. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I have. I
Okay.
have. It's a
So
very interesting theory.
yeah, and this is something that you see kind of popularized a lot, especially in like Marvel universe, Doctor Strange going through the multiverse, like all this stuff. The idea of the multiverse is, well, there's an infinite number of universes, and because there's so many, we can say, I mean, life must have
We
evolved if
can
everything's
presume that life might exist in some of them.
right. And because we're here, then it must be this one. And that is essentially the multiverse theory. And that's all good and well, but there's a number of problems with this type of thinking. And the first is generally one of the decision-making models that we teach here at ClickMill for making good decisions is what's called Occam's razor. And the idea here is usually the simpler solution is the better solution. So when considering where the universe came from, if we say take a theistic or we believe in one God, this could be Muslims, Jews, or Christians, or the major theistic religions. If we take a theistic approach and say God created the universe, and they'd say, that's that's just fate. Well, okay, well, where do you think the universe came from? Because science can't prove it. So they're immediately taking a faith position, but they're saying, I believe the universe came from the multiverse. Okay, well, firstly, what evidence do you have of that? There is none, because science does not go beyond the Big Bang. And then secondly, of this multiverse, you have now posited an infinite number of universes. And now you have to explain where all of those came from. So you've created yourself an infinite number of problems, and we have one. And so that's Occam's razor. The simplest solution is generally the best. And so they're going to posit something like a multiverse, which has literally no evidence for it. And they're going to posit an infinite number of those. And we're going to posit one creator because things look created, which we can get into in another call. But we're going to posit one creator, and we only have to explain one thing. Now,
Exactly, like where did this multiverse came from in the first place?
yeah. And
Like everything else,
yes.
we
And
can
so
trace back
then,
things from the infinite, but where did everything came from
exactly.
the first place? Yeah.
Yes. And you're keying directly in on the next point. You're exactly right. And what you'll say is, okay, so now you have all these multiverses. Well, where did the infinite number of universes come from? Because you're saying the universes come into being and there's an infinite number of them coming into being. Well, where did those come from? And they have answers to this now, which is even more based on faith than the multiverse. But what they'll usually say before they answer you is they'll usually say something to the effect, well, where did God come from? And that is a misunderstanding of the nature of God as Christians understand him, specifically Christians, but I think also Muslims and Jews would say they believe in an uncreated, eternal creator. So, in regard to what came first, it's a God who exists outside of time eternally. So, it's like God was not created. He is the unmoved mover. He is the uncaused causer who has existed eternally. That is the start. And he created the universe. And so I have one creator. I don't have to give an explanation of who created God because I don't believe he was created. That seems to be the biblical understanding of God. Okay, so if they can really understand that, then you say, but you're saying you have an infinite number of universes like ours that came into being. Where are those coming from now? And again, there is no science for this. This is all theory. And now what they posit is a universe generating universe. So there's like this universe that comes before the multiverse, and it's like sort of like a machine that creates universes. And now we know how we got all the. And then the question is, well, how does that happen? How do you get a universe generating universe? That seems like that would be somewhat complex in its parts. It is creating universes. What is the process? like just like a car would turn on and generate forward motion, there's a lot of parts in there. Are you telling me that the process for this universe to generate other universes just fell together? What is the process? This seems like there's a lot of faith in believing that there's a process that's happening. And then where did that process come from if it didn't fall together by itself? And now they have to explain how the universe generating universe got there, because it sounds like that has design to it. And so again, they're pushing backwards and backwards and backwards into this sort of infinite regress. Well, now what do? You can just say, okay, well, God designed the universe generating universe, which of course that's not going to happen. They're not going to say that. But, well, there's a universe generating universe generator that generated the universe generator. Like, we can go back forever, but the question is, yeah, but where does all like this complexity come from? You have to start somewhere. And so when we get them back to sort of this type of point, it becomes a question of faith. So it sounds so in kind of one of the correct answers to this is, it sounds like you have an awful lot of faith in this universe generator that sounds like it's got some design. And you and I both know at this point that there is no evidence for such a thing. It's just impossible. There is no evidence for this. And so it sounds like you have faith in this universe generator. I have faith in God. You have faith in this complex, unexplainable generator that generates an unexplainable infinite number of universes. And I have faith in one God who created. And it seems to me, in my opinion, we can always, of course, be polite and loving, that my view takes less faith than your view. And this is the first issue with atheism, is the way in which they explain the universe to come into existence. There is no evidence for it, is immediately a faith position. Once you posit anything before the Big Bang, you now have them in just a what's more likely, and a single God is more likely than pretty much anything they're going to posit. Another example beyond a multiverse, and then prior to that, a universe generating universe, is the expanding contracting model. And so what this says is, okay, well, the Big Bang exploded, and so where did it come from? Well, it came from a universe before it. And so basically what happens is, they believe the Big Bang explodes and it goes out and it stretches, and then it gets pulled back together, and then all of that momentum basically pushes it down to an infinitely small size, and then the pressure just re-explodes it. So you have this universe expanding and contracting model. So they would say, well, where did that Big Bang come from? And they would say, well, it came from the collapse of the universe prior, and then it exploded again. Well, where did that universe come from? Well, it came from the collapse before that. Well, where did that come from? It came from the collapse before that. It's like, okay, cool. There's a bunch of collapses, but where did the first Big Bang come from? Something had to start it. And so that is another issue, because you now have to, unless they're going to say, well, I just believe in an infinite regress, nothing ever started it, it's just been expanding and collapsing eternally, that'd be a very unusual position. They're going to have to take a stance on what they think started it, and then you probably fall back into something like the multiverse, or some other faith-based position that has no evidence to support it. So that is the first position that atheists are very often going to take, is going to be some model of the pre-universe prior to the Big Bang that explains the Big Bang, because they cannot have God there creating the universe. And so that is the first position. Any thoughts or questions from either of you guys?
Like, that just sounds so ridiculous. When we're tracing back, like, this happened because of this, but then before that, who created it, and then just
Yeah.
they just try to explain the unexplainable somehow. Just sounds so ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think obviously when we're talking to people who believe these things, like I would personally never say, well, that's ridiculous. We would want to address it, very politely, and just reason with them and kind of help them to see how that is a very difficult argument to make reasonably. But yes, I agree. I think it's very improbable. So that's obviously why I believe that.
Most of them don't push back this far within their own minds.
Right.
They hand wave away the belief in theism
Yes.
for whatever reason. You know, Michael Knowles often refers to them as Reddit tier atheists, right? Most of them hand wave away the belief in God and then don't push much further on the boundaries in their own minds because they ascribe that to be absurd.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, whatever else they replace it with is just reasonable by definition.
Right. Very good.
So as soon as you start asking those questions and pushing on the barriers, and allowing them the opportunity to think through their own beliefs,
Yes.
you have to do very little, right?
Yes.
Because as
And
soon
that
as
would
they
be,
start trying to backfill, yeah.
yeah, no, you're exactly right. And are there atheists who are extraordinarily well read and they may actually try to argue these points? Yeah, it's totally possible. Most
Absolutely.
atheists haven't really thought that through. And once you point some of these things out to them, it's, it's pretty straightforward that that's, they're like, okay, well, I see why that doesn't make sense. And they're going to start reconsidering their position. And this is kind of how, if they're being intellectually honest and they start looking at this, they're like, yeah, that is a faith position. And also that's a fairly complicated faith position with an infinite number of universes. So they're going to maybe start to consider shifting stance. And that could be to at least what we might call an agnostic stance, or no, and gnosis, knowledge, no knowledge. Like, well, okay, well, maybe it's not atheism. Maybe I'm not an atheist. Maybe I'm just not sure. And that's a great shift because you have kind of loosened their hold on the fact they believe that there is no God. And that's a great move to make.
Well, an
We have
80,
to break
80,
the
20, right?
ice.
80, yeah, 80-20, right. 80% of those results come from 20% of that shift. Absolutely.
Like the work it would take to get a person who spends hours and hours and hours consuming Sam Harris's content would be a lot higher than the work it's going to take to get the average college student who
Right.
has listened to what the first professor said to them and
Right.
like again hand waved away the belief in God.
Right. Yeah, and this isn't about having some big fancy debate with, the but even Dr. William Lane Craig, who writes some of the books back here. I really love his work. He said, my job isn't to convince the atheist on stage. My job is to convince the audience and to show them how, maybe extreme the position is when you really reason it backwards. So, and so what I want to do here is so this is talking about cosmology, and we're going to kind of wrap this up with what we would call the Kalam cosmological argument. And there are essentially 5 really solid arguments for theism against atheism. And so the first is the Kalam, and let's see if I can do this off the top of my head. Anything that um, anything that comes into existence must have a cause. Okay, so the universe came into existence, therefore the universe must have a cause. So let me make sure I'm getting this right. Now that I'm on the spot, it's escaping me. Yeah, there we go. Sorry. Whatever begins to exist has a cause of its existence. So that is premise 1, and this is where we're getting into some logic. And this works like math. So whatever comes into existence has a cause. The universe, I just said the whole thing. Okay. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And now this is a very difficult argument. And to my understanding, even the best atheists in the world have failed to create a counter to this. And why? Because number 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. And here they would have to say, well, the universe didn't begin to exist. The universe is eternal. Well, that is not what the evidence says. Pretty much, let's just go with the vast majority of evidence. The cosmic microwave background radiation, the expansion rate of the universe, the study of cosmology, all of these things point to what seems to be the idea that the universe came from a single point of origin, the Big Bang, which means it came into existence. So it has to then have a cause. So the universe began to exist seems scientifically very inarguable point, at least at this point. And therefore, the universe has a cause. Okay, so if they want to overthrow this, they have to show a reasonable, how do I say this? They have to show a logical reason to believe that something comes into existence with no cause. And you can't find this literally anywhere in the entire universe. everything that exists has a cause. This Bible has a cause. Someone made this. It didn't just appear. These pens, the trees, there is a cause for every single thing, all the way back to the very beginning. And what the atheist would like to argue is that the universe itself is literally the only exception to that rule, because everybody knows you're not going to find something that just appears. But they want to say the universe itself is the exception. And so, I don't know, I can deal with it, I guess. Not trying to be disrespectful, but that is the assertion, and the assertion flies in the face of logic.
For example, if there was no cause for the reason for the universe to exist, then where is the cause for everything else that exists in the universe?
Well, right, and we can point to a prior thing. So, I would say
that's all contradictional. I mean,
yeah. Well, and I could say, yeah, my cause is my parents, and my parents' cause is their parents. Well, who caused the very first people? Well, they actually came from, the whatever monkey came before them, and those came from the first living cell. Well, where did the first cell come from? You can't evolve from nothing to a cell. That requires everything fall together in one place, which we'll talk about in later. Well, same thing with the universe. You go back to the very beginning, where does it come from? It either comes from nothing or it comes from something. And every single thing we can see in the universe that exists had a cause. So it seems logical then that the universe would also have a cause, except they want to say it doesn't have a cause. That's the only thing that doesn't have a cause. It just happened for some inexplainable, there isn't a reason, it just happened. So that is the cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, and therefore the universe has a cause. And there's a causer. That would be, if you reason that backwards further from the cosmological argument, and this is what William Lane Craig does. He says, okay, if you have the universe that is composed of time, space, matter, then the thing that made it cannot be made of time, space, and matter, because he would be outside of those things, having created them. So it would have to be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, which begins to look very similar to what the Bible says God would be. And then beyond that, what has the ability to create? And when you think about timeless, spaceless, immaterial things, and again, this is all Dr. Craig, there are two options that you run into, and that would be an abstract object, which would be something like the number 2. Like math is abstract, the objects are the numbers, and you would think we didn't invent math, we discovered it, so that exists prior to the universe. Whether or not we're here or not, 2 plus 2 is still 4, but the number 2 doesn't cause anything, it just is the number 2. And then the other thing you have is a disembodied mind. You have a mind that does not have a material form, and that would be conscious, and that could cause something in the same way that we cause things. And so the two options really are like an abstract object or a disembodied mind, and the only thing that can cause anything is a mind. And so then what do you have? You have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial mind that caused the universe, and that is something that we could say sounds an awful lot like God, and that is all very logically sound when you break it down. And so that is the Kalam cosmological argument. That is one of the 5 very powerful arguments for Christianity, or not for Christianity, for a theistic worldview, meaning a God who loves his creation and interacts with him. And that is something that atheists, even the best atheists in the world, the most brilliant atheists, have no answer to. They cannot really argue that. And this is something you can watch if you watch Dr. Craig's debates. He has 2 PhDs, and he requires that the atheists that he debates have at least one. And he has never lost a debate, and he pretty much posits the same 5 arguments every time. And so that is the first one. I'm going to pause here, and we'll move into the next subject, unless anybody else has any thoughts or comments on the Kalam cosmological argument or cosmology.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
We covered a lot.
Yeah, I know that's deep. Okay. Pausing.